Hello, friends. My name's Ty, and I'm going to read to you. I'm sorry there has been so long in between these chapters. I will promise to do better. It's time for Chapter 4 of The Watch. Here we go. Once his shift was over, Quinn wearily signed out of his car, put his gear away, and drove home. He fed his fat, gray tomcat, Gus, and fell gratefully into his bed. Sleep came quickly, but lasted only a couple of hours before he found himself staring at the ceiling, his mind running. He kept thinking about Scooby, the boy at the school, Mike Allison, and Brandon Williams. There was something that he and everyone else was overlooking, something that had not been fully investigated, something that screamed for his attention. As the day wore on, he gave up trying to sleep and got out of his bed. His building was across the street from the Resolution YMCA, and he put on a heavy sweatshirt and track pants and went into the weight room. He spent an hour, MP3 player on, trying to lose himself in movement and strain, but the usual solace he found in the stacks of iron did not come today. When he had finished, he felt no clearer, only sweaty and tired. He went back to his condo and showered. He thought about trying to sleep some more, but his mind was still churning and he knew it would only be a waste of time. Finally, he said goodbye to Gus, got in his car, and drove to the office. As he entered the building, he looked at his watch. It was not yet 2 o'clock in the afternoon, well before his 6 o'clock night shift was to start. He had plenty of time to kill. He walked to the detachment's file room and used his electronic fob to deactivate the magnetic lock and enter. He scanned the shelves for a moment and quickly found what he was looking for: Scooby's shooting file. It was not difficult to find. Most of the files in Resolution were small, a few pages at most that would fit into a single file folder. With the advent of the mostly electronic file system, most files never saw actual paper at all. But the documentation from Scooby's shooting filled several large accordion folders and stood out on the shelf. Quinn stood looking at the folders, wondering to himself what he was going to look for in their contents. He had gone over the incident in his mind a dozen times. He had tried to talk to the people who knew Scooby, and he was still at a dead end. Was he wasting his time, or is there something that he should look for? As he was considering, another row of folders caught his attention, the only other large file in the room, in fact. The shooting at Resolution High School. This incident he had not considered quite so carefully as Scooby's shooting. At the time, it had been an isolated incident of violence, and Quinn had been cleared very quickly of any wrongdoing. He'd only wanted to put it behind him and try to forget the image of a young man screaming and brandishing a pistol while Quinn shot him in the chest. Shaking his head to clear the image, Quinn gathered the folders under his arm and completed a sign-out card. He walked to his empty desk and dumped the folders on them. He looked at the now jumbled folders on the desktop and blew his breath out through puffed cheeks. It was a huge amount of information, and he didn't know what he was actually looking for. He shrugged, grabbed the first folder, and pulled out a bundle of paperwork. He read continuously, barely glancing up, for more than an hour. He found photographs of the scene, transcribed witness statements, occurrence reports from the members that attended, but nothing jumped out at him. Most of the file was concerned with the police shooting and whether it was justified or not. There was very little focus on the boy, Jeremy Rendell, and why he decided to bring his father's pistol to school and start shooting people. Quinn flipped open another thick folder and saw a newspaper clipping from the Resolution Times. The story was about Jeremy Rendell and his tragic shooting death. It contained a picture. It showed Jeremy smiling and looking quite sane, arm in arm with a pretty dark-haired girl. The caption below the picture made reference to Jeremy, a star athlete winning the provincial volleyball championship, and was written during the previous school year. It named the girl in the photo with Jeremy as Amy Brooks. Quinn sat, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed, and frowned at the picture a long time. The face of Jeremy Rendell looked so different in the image, compared to the screaming, sobbing wretch that Quinn had desperately tried to negotiate with. The boy had been holding an old Colt pistol to the back of a classmate's head, just as with Scooby, Quinn had not been able to communicate with him. Quinn had begged Jeremy to put the gun down, but he hadn't listened. In a final scream like a tortured animal, the boy had raised his pistol towards Quinn and started firing wild shots. Quinn, his options exhausted, had returned fire and struck the boy twice in the chest, silencing his screams. Quinn blinked and glanced around as he realized there were tears in his eyes. Wiping hastily at his face, he looked down at the photograph and an idea struck him. He pulled the clipping from the file, folded it over so only the girl's face was showing, and made a photocopy of it. He folded the new copy and stuffed it into the pocket of his jeans. As he was putting the file back together, Inspector Green walked out of his office and past the desk Quinn sat at. "Sullivan? What are you doing here?" Your shift doesn't start until 6, does it? The inspector asked, looking at his watch. Quinn looked at the chubby, balding man. No, sir, it doesn't. Just trying to get a few things done before I go out on the road. Oh, right, Green said. You know I can't authorize overtime for this. No room in the budget, you see. This will have to be voluntary duty. Quinn had to suppress a strong urge to take the man's all-important budget, stick it in a sock with a few dollars worth of pennies, and beat him with it. He took a deep breath, started to count to 10 in his head, and forced his face to remain impassive. I understand that, sir. I was just trying to get caught up. We've been busy on the road lately. Green nodded, satisfied. Very good, then. He walked off, whistling tunelessly to himself, looking pleased. Quinn watched the back of Green's head and wanted to throw a chair at it. Instead, he put the file away and went to the locker room to put his duty gear on. There was someone he needed to talk to. Half an hour later, Quinn was leaning against the hood of his police car outside the entrance to Resolution High School. The end of the day bell went off and kids started to trickle out of the double doors. Quinn had Amy Brooks's picture in his hand and scanned the herds of nattering teenagers for her face. The girl in the picture was pretty and vibrant, with her hair carefully styled and wearing designer clothes. The groups of popular girls were easy to spot, carrying Coach purses and wearing Juicy Couture hoodies, with gaggles of posturing teenage boys following in their wake. Quinn looked among them for Amy Brooks. The outpouring of students slowed to smaller groups and then to singular individuals. Quinn had almost given up, thinking he had missed her, when he saw a hunched-shouldered girl with lank, greasy hair hanging in her face slouch her way past his car. He barely glanced at her as she walked by, but her profile caught his attention. He looked again. She barely resembled the picture, but he had found Amy Brooks. He folded the picture in his hand, stuffed it behind his body armor, and stepped after her. "Excuse me," he said. "Amy?" The girl flinched, drawing her shoulders up to her ears. She looked behind her and saw Quinn, took in his uniform, and relaxed, but only slightly. "What do you want?" she demanded, scowling at him. "I'm Constable Sullivan. I was hoping to—" "I know who you are," she snapped. "I was there when you killed Jeremy. I was in the room when you shot him. I said, what the fuck do you want?" Quinn was taken aback. This conversation wasn't going at all as he'd hoped, but what should he expect? A month previously he had killed her boyfriend while she and a dozen other students watched. Her words reminded him sharply of the conversation had with Lanny the previous night. His popularity in this town was going from sweet fuck all to absolute shit. He took a deep breath and tried to focus on the reason he was there. "I was hoping to ask you a couple of questions," he said, "about Jeremy." "What kind of questions?" she asked, suspicious. "You trying to make yourself look good after you killed him?" She turned and continued down the sidewalk. "I already gave a statement about what happened. Leave me alone." Quinn thought momentarily about giving up and letting her go, but there were too many things he needed to know, and this girl was standing in front of his only avenue of investigation. He trotted a few strides and fell into step beside her. "I don't want to talk to you about what happened. I want to ask you about Jeremy himself." She stopped and turned to him. He had her attention for the moment. He kept his face mild, but was inwardly relieved that he at least got her to stop and listen. "What do you mean?" she asked. "There are a couple things that I think were overlooked in the initial investigation. I'm trying to fill in the gaps. I want to talk to you about Jeremy, about what kind of guy he really was. I know what everyone said about him in the newspapers, but no one knows a guy better than his girlfriend." She brushed the greasy hair away from her face and looked at him, studying his face like she was reading a billboard. "All right," she said finally. "What do you want to know?" Quinn shrugged. He still wasn't even sure what he was looking for, so that he asked the most general question he could think of. What kind of guy was Jeremy? Really? She sighed and looked away from Quinn's face. For a moment, the attitude, the dislike, the malice fell away and was replaced by a profound sadness. "He was," she said, "honest to God, the nicest guy I ever met. He was sweet and respectful and funny and nice to everyone. He didn't bully the smaller kids or make fun of the geeks. I'd never met anyone who had ever had anything bad to say about him. Our teachers loved him. His parents worshipped the ground he walked on. Everyone at school thought he was the coolest guy ever. He loved me, and I loved him." She looked back into Quinn's face, and the malice returned, twisting her pretty features. "And now he's gone." Quinn heard the accusation in her voice and did his best to ignore it. "Had you noticed anything different about him? I mean, before his death? You mean before you shot him?" Quinn felt the color rise in his cheeks. "Yeah," he said. before then. She studied him some more. Why do you want to know this? Why are you asking me this shit? What fucking difference does it make? You already killed him, and now you're trying to drag him back up? Fuck you. She turned and stomped down the sidewalk. Once again, Quinn had to trot to keep up with her. That's not why I'm here, Amy, he grimaced, trying to find the words that would convince her to talk to him. If Dave were here, he would know exactly what to say, but Quinn didn't have that particular gift. I don't think Jeremy was bad, and I'm not trying to make him look that way. I think someone did something to him to make him behave the way he did, and I'm trying to find out what it was. She stopped again. Did something to him? Like what? He shrugged. I'm not really sure, but I'm trying to find out. And if someone did do something to him, what are you going to do about them? Make sure they never do it to anyone else. Do you really mean that? The query was all suspicious, but... The query was still suspicious, but Quinn thought he saw a vague glimmer of something else. Hope. He nodded. I do. She crossed her arms, picking at the corner of her mouth with one dirty fingernail. She pulled in a heavy breath, letting it out in a hiss. Okay, yeah, he was acting different. It started a couple days after the beginning of the school year. First I didn't see him much, and then I didn't see him at all. Then he stopped even answering the phone. When I did talk to him, he'd tell me they had too much homework and practice and stuff. She paused, looking at her feet. Quinn waited and said nothing. He could see that she wanted to speak, but wasn't sure whether she should or what she wanted to say. He stood patiently and let her have her moment. Finally, she looked up again. Then he started calling me again, she said. But when he called, he didn't really want to talk to me. He was just kind of talking at me about really weird shit. Quinn folded his arms, a familiar burr poking at his mind. What kind of weird shit? She shrugged. I don't know, mostly just babbling. I didn't understand most of it. The only thing I could make out was that he kept talking about eyes. He kept saying something about eyes in the dark. Eyes in the dark. The phrase jabbed at Quinn's mind, painfully. Lanny had said Scooby talked about the same thing. Did he say anything else, he asked. That's all I could get from him for about a week before that day. At first, he kept coming to school, but he wouldn't talk to anyone. He'd just sit in class and stare at the top of his desk. Then he stopped coming at all. I went to his house to see if he was okay. His parents told me he was too busy studying and wouldn't see anyone. I think he was hiding in his room all day, and they didn't know how to deal with it, so they just ignored it and pretended it was academic. Quinn nodded. Is there anything else you can tell me? No, she said, but did not move away. She started picking at the corner of her mouth again, like a tell from a bad poker player. Quinn waited. Okay, there is something, she said. But this has got to be off the record. You can't write this down in your reports or anything. Quinn nodded again. Sure, he said, knowing there was no such thing as off the record. Amy Brooks took in a deep breath and blew it out through her nose. Jeremy started using some stuff about a month before that day, just after the start of school. He didn't say anything before because no one else knew. Sorry, let me start that over again. I didn't say anything before because no one else knew, and I didn't want to, tarnish his memory or anything. Quinn nodded. What was he using? Speed or meth? She hesitated. Whatever you call it. He was smoking it, in a glass pipe with a round end. I saw him once down a path on the way to school when he thought I wasn't looking. Is there anything that made him start? Amy began chewing at her dirty nails. He was under a lot of pressure. He played 3 different sports, was a straight-A student, and his parents were expecting him to keep it up so he could get into a good school. This was our last year of high school, and he was starting to crack under the pressure. He was tired all the time and couldn't keep up all the shit he had to do. He started using it so he could stay awake longer and get more stuff done. Where was he getting it? I'm not sure, she said, around a mouthful of her own finger. He wouldn't tell me when I confronted him about it, but I think it was someplace down in the south end of town. He let something slip about it once. Like her statement about the eyes in the dark, the south end of town poked the gerbil in Quinn's brain and got the wheel moving. That was the same general area Scooby had been frequenting before his death, although the homeless man had been working, not buying drugs, and Quinn wasn't sure if the 2 locations would tie together. I don't want to talk about this anymore, Amy said, dropping a now bloody finger from her mouth. Are we done? Yeah, Amy, we're done. And thanks. Yeah, she said, whatever. And the girl turned and slouched her way into the gray afternoon. Quinn saw her reach up and wipe the tears running down her face. Quinn got into his patrol vehicle and drove back to the office. He still had 2 hours before his actual shift started, and he sat down in his cubicle to attempt to work on some of his ongoing files. He logged into his computer and sat staring at the screen, unable to focus on any task. His mind still picking at certain phrases he had heard over the last 2 days. He was still staring at nothing, eyes unfocused, when Dave McLeod walked into the pit for the start of the shift. When Quinn did not look up at him or acknowledge his presence, Dave flicked his ear with a sharp pop. Quinn jerked and sat up straight. "You have a lobotomy you forgot to mention?" Dave asked. "What?" "No," Quinn said, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "Just tired, I guess. I didn't sleep much today." "Something on your mind?" "Yeah," Quinn said. "A couple of things, I guess." Dave sat down on the edge of Quinn's desk. "You all right, man? You look like someone stole your cupcake." Quinn waved him off. "Nothing to worry about." "Oh, do you know of any active drug houses in the South End?" Yeah, Dave said with a snort. "How about all of them?" "That part of town is a fucking shithole. For every house filled with regular people trying to get by, you've got 3 dens of crackheads and assholes. You're gonna have to narrow it down for me, dude. Why do you ask?" Quinn told Dave about the conversation with Amy Brooks. "So you think that Jeremy Rendell buying drugs in the South End has something to do with him going nuts?" Dave asked when Quinn had finished. "I don't know," Quinn said as he fiddled with a pen on his desk. May have been a simple drug use that led to Jeremy's lunacy, but if there are autopsy reports from the kid, they've been suppressed because I didn't find them when I looked through the file. I guess I'm looking for some answers into all this shit. First the kid, then Scooby. There's something that we're missing." Dave folded his arms. "Yeah," he said, "we're missing a couple of months of vacation and a pay raise. There may be something that was overlooked, but there might not be. Sometimes things just ain't got no fancy explanation. Sometimes that big purple elephant on your desk is nothing but a big purple elephant and you're just chasing your own tail. Sometimes you just gotta leave things be. Maybe that's what you need to do here." Quinn nodded. What Dave said made sense, but he still had a bunch of questions that were looking for answers, and the cop in him wouldn't let it alone. Charles Rafe appeared in the doorway to the corporal's office. "I want to have a little briefing before we start." Quinn and Dave stood and walked into the small office. Sandy was already sitting in one of the chairs before Rafe's desk, making an entry in her notebook. She looked up and smiled when they walked in. Rafe opened a folder on his desk and began handing out sheets of paper to the 3 constables. "One of the major crime knobs made up these intelligence posters for Brandon Williams. What's particularly intelligent about them, I'm not sure. But they figure he's still in resolution. He hasn't got any resources anywhere else, no friends, no family, and no money. Put these in your cars and keep your eyes peeled." Quinn accepted the poster, which bore a mugshot image of a dirty, pockmarked face topped with a nest of greasy hair. He studied the face carefully, committing it to memory. "Is this the most recent picture of this asshole?" Dave asked, peering at the photograph. "Yeah," Rafe said. "Taken about a month ago, from the last time he was arrested for possession. That's all I got. Go forth and fight crime and or evil." Quinn rose to leave, and Rafe stopped him. "Quinn, stay a minute. Close the door." The younger man gritted his teeth. Being asked to stay after briefing was never good. It always meant trouble of some kind. But he did as he was told, closed the door and turned back to the hulking corporal, hunched behind his desk like a gorilla at a toy piano. "You look like shit," Rafe said. "When was the last time you slept?" "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked, boy." "When was the last time you got some rest?" Quinn shrugged. "I'm fine. I just didn't sleep much today. I got a few things on my mind." "You want the night off?" "No, I'm good." Rafe blew a breath out through his nose, stirring his mustache. "You've been through a lot of crap lately, son. Don't think anyone has forgotten. I could order you to take the night off." "Yes, you could," Quinn replied. "But are you going to send Dave home with me?" "What do you mean?" Dave was there when we shot Scooby, but no one is bothering him." Rafe stood up. "First of all, son, no one is bothering you. I'm trying to look after you. Second, I realized Dave was with you when you had to put down Scooby, but it was only you who pulled the trigger on that kid in the school. Third, take that petulant tone with me and I'll slap the goddamn taste out of your mouth. You got me?" "Sorry, Rafe," Quinn said, eyes on the floor. "Won't happen again." He realized that the big man really was only looking out to Quinn's best interest, and acting like a spoiled child was no way to show thanks. "So, do I need to order you off for tonight?" Quinn took a deep breath. Rafe was trying to give him an out, a way to take some time off without having to ask for it. "No, boss. I'm all good." Rafe sat back down, his chair creaking violently, and drummed his fingers on his desk while giving Quinn an appraising look. "All right," he said. "Go to work. But if you change your mind, let me know and I'll change mine." "Sure thing, boss." Quinn opened the door and stepped back into the pit. He gave his desk a cursory glance and decided against wasting any more time trying to do paperwork. He was so distracted that anything he got accomplished would look like it should have been written in crayon anyway. Grabbing his uniform cord off the back of his chair, he went out to his car, got in, and drove out of the detachment parking lot. For once, the radio was quiet, and he drove around for some time, pulling over a few cars for minor traffic offenses. He checked the drivers and let them go with a warning, having no interest in ruining someone's day with an expensive violation ticket. Eventually, he found himself in the south end of Resolution Cove, driving among the dilapidated houses. Absent here were the long driveways and manicured lawns that dominated the sprawling waterfront houses of Resolution's wealthier district. Instead, the houses were squat and plain, with peeling paint and ragged yards that were cluttered with broken living room furniture and old garbage. Gaunt faces peered out of dirty windows, eyeing the police car suspiciously. Police were seldom welcome in the South End, and it usually meant that someone was going to jail, or the ministry was seizing someone's kids. Quinn looked at the old houses and felt the dislike that emanated from some of the inhabitants. He'd seen houses like this numerous times during his service in Surrey, but in Resolution they were so much more obvious due to the ridiculous affluence that sat mere blocks away. He realized that Dave McLeod was right. Any one of these houses, or several of them, could be selling drugs. There was no way to narrow it down. Without the dealer's name or some other kind of information, it would be impossible to find out where Jeremy Rendell had been buying his drugs. He thought for a couple of seconds about knocking on a few doors and asking if anyone remembered seeing Scooby at any of the houses in the neighborhood, but quickly abandoned the idea. No one here would be willing to talk to the police. Even if they were, the likelihood of them remembering a crazy old homeless man among the multitudes of mentally ill and drug-addicted that lived in the South End were just this side of fuck all. Grimacing against a ball of frustration in his stomach, Quinn turned down a street that would take him out of the South End and accelerated towards the city center. Joe Rabowski watched the police car pass in front of his house. Joe Rabowski watched the police car pass in front of his house, peering out from the small crack in his dirty, yellowing curtains. He waited until the cop's taillights had faded into the dark and then a few moments more to make sure he wasn't coming back. Finally satisfied, he let the curtain fall back into place. He shouldered the sawed-off shotgun he kept in the house and moved from the picture window into the living room and back into the kitchen. He paused for a moment to stare at the door that led to the basement. He moved on quickly. He didn't much like the basement. He laid his shotgun on the table between two piles of money, and a barrel pointed at the man seated in one of the worn-out chairs. "You didn't touch any of my money while I was gone, did you?" Joe asked the man in the chair. The man was far bigger than Rabowski, with the thick limbs earned through a lifetime of manual labor, but despite his size, he was terrified. Having a shotgun pointed at by a crazy tattooed drug dealer could do that to you. "No, Joe," the man said. "I wouldn't touch your money." The man laughed nervously. "Right. So who was it told you about me?" Joe was suspicious of any new customers. It was the constant paranoia that came with selling drugs in a town where the cops had no sense of humor at all. He was especially paranoid since he had found this abandoned house. He never stayed in one place too long, and that was how the pigs found you. But he'd had it good since he came here. His sales had gone up, his cash flow had gone from trickle to a flood, and the other dealers in town had started giving him some room. He was small time before, but now people, important people, stepped out of his way when he walked into certain rooms. "Ah," the big man said on the other side of the table. "I heard about you from Jimmy. Jimmy down at the docks." "Jimmy at the docks, huh?" Rabowski said, fingering the grip of the shotgun. "And what did you say your name was?" I'm Rick," the man said, twisting his mesh ball cap in his hand. "Right," Joe said, picking up the shotgun again and cradling it in the crook of his arm. "So, Rick who knows Jimmy from the docks, you a cop? You know what I do to cops, right?" Rick twisted in his seat. "No, Joe, hell no. I'm no cop. I run a boat, pulling freighters. I ain't no cop." Joe Rabowski looked at the man. He knew the guy wasn't a cop, but he liked watching him squirm. He enjoyed the man's fear. Still, you never could be too careful. If you stayed in one place too long, the cops always found you. He was willing to risk it, though. This house was too good to be true. He had stumbled upon it a month previously, when he was rolling through the South End making some collections. It was abandoned, the roof was whole, the power was still connected, and he didn't have to put his name on a lease, and he lived light so he could be gone in 2 minutes if the cops ever did find him. The only problem with the house was the dreams he started having since he got here. But they weren't that bad. And the basement. Joe didn't much like the basement. But he could not help but go down there. So, Rick, who's not a cop, you like my house? Sure, Joe. The nervous man said and looked around. It's good. It's my lucky house. The big man's eyes rolled around the tabletops and settled on the shotgun. Okay, Joe. I don't want to leave it. The man said nothing and continued to twist his hat nervously. So if you tell the cops I'm here, I'm going to find you. I'll fuck your wife, kill your kids, and burn your house down with you in it. You understand? The man looked like he might cry. Sure, Joe. I wouldn't do anything like that. Okay, Joe said, putting the shotgun back on the table, but keeping his hands on it. Well, Rick knows Jimmy from the docks and isn't a cop. What can I get for you? The man said, still eyeing the shotgun. Jimmy said you could give me something that will keep me awake at work. Maybe, Joe said. What do you want it for? I need to pull double shifts in the harbor, Rick said. We're behind on some payments, and if I don't get up some cash soon, my kids don't eat. I'm having a hard time staying awake. Fuck, I almost crashed into a yacht last night. Jimmy said he could help me out. Joe Rabowski put on his best smile. The man across from him looked more terrified instead of reassured. Sure, man. I got just what you need. Joe stood up from the table. But we'll have to go downstairs. I keep my stash in the basement. As Quinn drove around aimlessly, he found that he had absolutely no desire to do his job tonight and was seriously thinking of going back to the office and taking Rafe up on his offer of the night off. He was bone-weary, distracted, and frustrated. He did not feel in any mood to be dealing with people, especially the foolish ones. He put on his left turn signal to make his way back to the office when the radio crackled and the tone alert blasted through the speaker, indicating an emergency call. The dispatcher's voice quickly followed. Resolution to Resolution Cars, we have a robbery in progress at Jiffy Gas. Units to respond, please. Quinn snapped out of his funk and looked around to get his bearings. Jiffy Gas was only a few blocks behind him in the southernmost area of Resolution, where the houses gave way to wilderness. He picked up his radio and keyed the mic. Resolution, Charlie 1, I'm 2 minutes out. He flicked on the car's lights and sirens, checked for traffic around him, then cranked the wheel hard and jammed his foot onto the accelerator. The engine roared, the tires screeched, and the back end of the car swung 180 degrees. He kept the accelerator pinned and sped towards the gas station. The radio crackled at the dispatcher's voice again, and Quinn turned up the volume to hear it over the siren. Resolution Cars, our complainant advised that he watched a man walk into the gas station with a knife in his hand. The suspect then started stabbing people inside. The suspect, described as 6 feet tall, heavy build, wearing a brown coat, is still in the gas station. Quinn keyed his mic again. Charlie 1 copies. Another 30 seconds. Dave McLeod's voice came over the air. Quinn, Sandy and I are away from the office. We'll be 5 minutes, code 3. Copy that, Quinn said into the mic. They were clear on the other side of the city from the gas station. Even with the lights and sirens, it would take them time to get there. Until then, he would be on his own. He pushed down harder on the gas pedal and hoped they were driving fast. Charlie 1, the dispatcher called. Fire and ambulance have been advised are en route. Quinn checked his mental map and figure where they would be coming from. There was a full-time fire hall, one of 2 in Resolution, only a few blocks from the gas station, but the ambulance would have to come from the north end of town near the detachment. He made a hard right, the car drifting around the corner, and Jiffy Gas came into view. There was no time to plan a tactical approach, and he drove the car right up to the front door. He undid his seatbelt while he was still 20 meters away and threw the car into park before it was fully stopped. The transmission made an expensive-sounding grinding noise and lurched to a halt. He thrust open the driver's door and drew his pistol as he scrambled out. The front door of the gas station burst open, and he saw a big man, a little taller than himself, with thick, powerful limbs stuffed into a coat that looked 2 sizes too small for him. The man had his hood up and a bloody kitchen knife in his hand. Quinn pointed his pistol at the man's chest. "Police! Drop the knife!" he yelled. The suspect didn't hesitate, turned to his left, and ran around the corner of the gas station. "Fuck," Quinn said, as he saw the tails of the dirty coat disappear around the side of the brick building. He looked through the glass door of the gas station. A young blonde woman was on her back on the floor, clutching her stomach. She was screaming as her heels kicked out, making thick smears in her own blood. A clerk, dressed in a red uniform shirt, ran from the back of the store with a first aid kit in his hand. Quinn stood a moment, torn between going to the victim and chasing the suspect. Then he heard the long, welcome wail of a fire truck and saw the red lights come around the corner, a few blocks away. The fire boys could deal with the wounded far better than he could, he thought as he charged around the side of the building. He keyed his portable mic that hung at his shoulder, yelling into it. "Resolution! Foot pursuit! Suspect is southbound around the gas station!" He rounded the corner and came to an alley that ran behind the store between the few rows of houses at the edge of the city. He saw a dark shape sprinting down the alley ahead of him, veer to the right. He slammed his pistol back into his holster so he wouldn't drop it in the dark and ran after the fleeing suspect. "Resolution! Suspect is west into an alley," he called into the radio. "Copy, west through the alley," the dispatcher replied. If he had still been working in the Surrey detachment, he would likely have 20 other cops coming to help him, along with a police dog to track the suspect and possibly a helicopter flying overhead. The single police dog services member who had once been in Resolution had been transferred to another detachment months before Quinn arrived, and helicopters were scarce. He was shit out of luck and would have to leg it out. Quinn was quick and could chase down most guys he ran after, but the man in front of him was quicker and was getting away from him. The suspect lunged to his left, easily vaulting over a fence and into the backyard of one of the houses. Once Quinn reached the fence, he found that it was over 8 feet tall and made of cedar paneling. The surface was smooth and there was no purchase for his boots, and getting over the fence was going to be a massive pain in the ass. He had no idea how the fleeing suspect had cleared it so easily. "Suspect is south through a yard," he called on the radio, then jumped and grabbed the top of the fence, grunting as he hauled himself up. He swung his right leg up, hooked a heel over the top of the fence, and dragged himself over. He landed awkwardly, but on his feet, and snatched his pistol from its holster as he checked the yard. Nothing but a few broken toys and some battered lawn furniture. He moved forward cautiously. There were a lot of places to hide in the yard, and the house ahead of him looked deserted with no lights on and no movement inside. As he came around the end of the house, he saw the open gate sagging on its hinges, the wood around the latch freshly shattered. He moved quickly through the yard and into the street beyond, pistol held out ahead of him, the muscle matching the sweep of his eyes. He found himself on his final narrow laneway before the residential area gave to brush, nothing but trees and rocks for hundreds of kilometers. He glanced both ways down the street and saw no movement. He swallowed back the harsh metallic taste that came after a hard run, felt his blood pounding in his ears, and swore in frustration. There were no streetlights out here. He could barely see 5 feet into the trees. If he tried to follow the suspect into that, he would either get ambushed or hopelessly lost. The suspect was gone. Quinn swore again before he keyed the radio mic. "Resolution," he growled. "Suspect appears to have fled south into the trees." When he released the mic, Rice's baritone voice cut over the air. "Quinn, you are not going to pursue him into the trees. Stay where you are, and I'll come help you look." "Copy that," Quinn replied. "I'll hold here until you arrive." A few moments later, Quinn saw headlights come around the corner, the left side, and Rafe pulled up into the supervisor's Chevy Suburban. The giant man got out and looked Quinn up and down. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm fine. I didn't even get close to the guy. He was running like a fucking gazelle." "You get a look at him?" Quinn shook his head. He had his hood up and I couldn't see his face, but he was big and in good shape. He ran away from me like I was standing still and got over an 8-foot fence like he was stepping out of the shower. Rafe rubbed his mustache and nodded. "The store is video. We'll have a look. See if we get a face shot." He eyed Quinn, who was still seething and staring into the woods. "You know chasing that guy, alone, into the trees at night is a bad idea, right?" "If you'd gone into him after that," Rafe jabbed his thick finger towards the brush line, "I'd kick your ass till your head rattled. Even if you did manage to catch him and didn't get stabbed in the process." "I know, but it still pisses me off." "I wouldn't expect any different," Rafe said, as he walked back towards the driver's door of the Suburban. "We're not doing any good standing out here in the cold. Let's go see what Dave and Sandy have." What seemed to have taken Quinn a small eternity to run took only a few minutes to cover in a vehicle. He and Rafe were soon pulling back into the parking lot of the gas station. The fire truck that Quinn had seen earlier was parked in the street, and there were 2 ambulances, lights flashing in the parking lot. Rafe parked the truck and the 2 Mounties got out. A paramedic crew was loading the girl Quinn had seen through the door into the back of an ambulance. She was awake and alert, but her hands and face were covered in her own blood. When she was loaded in the ambulance, one of the medics got in while the other, a stout man who bore a striking resemblance to Elmer Fudd, closed the doors behind him and started towards the driver's door. "Al," Rafe called to the medic, Al Blaker, who Quinn had met on several files, turned and tilted his chin towards them. "How's she look?" Al jerked his thumb toward the body of the ambulance. "The girl got multiple stab wounds to her stomach. I don't know if she's going to die, but she's in a bad way. He pointed at the other ambulance across the parking lot. The other crew has her boyfriend who tried to defend her. He's got cuts all over his hands and arms, and a few slashes to his chest. He'll need a whole roll of thread to stitch him up, but at no risk of dying. He opened the driver's door of the ambulance and got in while he was talking to them over his shoulder. We need to get her moving. I've called ahead to the hospital, and they're prying a surgeon off his couch and getting him to head over. You need anything else? Rafe shook his head. No, we'll see about talking to her when she's taken care of. Thanks. He stepped forward and slammed the ambulance door, slapping it twice with his big hand. Al nodded from the driver's seat, flicked on the siren, pulled into the street, and accelerated towards the hospital with the roar of the big diesel engine. Rafe jerked his head towards the storefront, and Quinn followed him in. Dave and Sandy were behind the counter. Dave had his notebook out and was scribbling in it while Sandy sat on the shelf with her arms around a shaking, pimply-faced blonde kid who looked about 17, the clerk that Quinn had seen with the first aid kit. The inside of the store was in shambles. Several display racks of potato chips and candy bars were knocked over. The bags split open and their contents spread across the floor. There was a huge smeared pool of blood where the girl had been lying when Quinn arrived, and there were dark splatters across several of the shelves. It looked like an insane expressionist artist was trying to create a masterpiece in bodily fluids and snack food. The building smelled of blood and fear, Quinn thought as he studied the scene. It was like a bad horror movie. The clerk had his trembling hands in his lap, and one of his legs kept bouncing up and down in a nervous jitter. He didn't say anything at all, the clerk stuttered. He just walked in with his big fucking grin on his face and his big fucking knife in his hand. He stabbed that girl while she was picking out a chocolate bar. He didn't say anything. He just stabbed her. Didn't ask for money or anything. I would have given him everything in the till. He just stabbed her. The kid's speech was hard to follow through the sobs and sniffles. He was hardly in any condition to give a statement, but Quinn knew it was important to try and get the details from the witness immediately while the event was still fresh in their mind. A calmer, more controlled statement could always be taken later, but the initial questions needed to be asked now. It's okay, Jason, Sandy said as she rubbed the kid's back. You're safe now. We're here and he won't come back. I just need you to answer a few more questions. Do you know him, the guy with the knife? Jason squeezed his shoulders up around his ears as though he were hoping he could disappear into them. He looked familiar, the kid said. I don't know where I'd seen him before. Dave scribbled the kid's answers in his notebook while Sandy comforted him. Okay, Sandy said as she rubbed his back some more. I know this is hard to talk about. I know this sucks. But is there anything else that make you think, anything else that you can think of that would help us catch the guy? The kid trembled and shook his head. Sandy looked at Rafe. Corporal, I've already called Jason's mother. She's on her way to come here and get him. Rafe nodded. I talked to the fire chief, Jason. He said you got the first aid kit and tried to stop the bleeding on that girl. That's a brave thing to do and probably saved her life. I'm going to see you're recognized for it. Jason said nothing, but nodded and shook some more. Rafe looked at Dave. Do we know if there's any video? Yeah, boss, it's in the back, Dave said, and pointed to the rear of the store. Should be good, too. It's a new digital system that the owners put in a couple weeks ago, after they got robbed for the third time in a month. Good, Rafe said. We'll have to call someone down here to run it for us. No need, Dave said and grinned. I got the owner to show me how to use it when it was installed, just in case the kid working didn't know. Very good, Rafe said, walking towards the back of the store, and he waved for his constables to follow. Sandy patted the kid and pulled her arm from around her shoulders. Quinn saw him look up at her, pitiful desperation painted on his face, his mouth working like a baby bird waiting for its mother to feed it. Sandy looked back at him and smiled. I'll just be over there. I'll be back in a minute. The kid closed his mouth, nodded, and continued to shake. Once all four Mounties were standing together, near the door to the back room, Rafe tilted his chin towards the kid. How's he doing? Sandy shook her head. He's a fucking mess. I'm going to call victim services and have them head over to his house after his mother comes to get him. I don't want to take a formal statement from him until he calms down, because he can't stop crying enough to get a sentence out. Goddamn civilians, Rafe growled. No ID on the bad guy? Quinn asked. No, Sandy said. The Quinn told me twice the guy looked familiar, but he doesn't know where from. Quinn nodded. I'll start a canvass once we look at the video and see if any of the neighbors know him. Rafe looked at Dave. Did you get the names of the victims? Dave flipped backwards in his notebook. Yeah, I didn't actually talk to them, just grabbed their driver's licenses out of their wallets while the medics were working on them. How bad are they? Rafe rubbed his mustache. Al said the guy isn't bad, but there's no guarantees for the girl. I want us to work under the assumption that this is a murder investigation. The major crime knobs have gone back to Nanaimo, and they won't come back unless someone is actually dead. So this is all on us. He rubbed a calloused hand over his bald head, thinking. Sandy, you see to the kid and then call the owners to let them know what happened. As of now, the store belongs to us and Her Majesty the Queen. No one goes in or out that isn't a part of the investigation. Dave snorted. Inspector Green is going to be pissed when he hears he's going to have to pay out some more overtime. Fuck Green, Rafe snarled. I'll call Steve and put it through him. Green is too busy polishing his 9-iron and kissing the mayor's ass anyway. Quinn smiled ruefully. Any good manager that he had ever worked for would be putting in more time in the office if there was a series of violent crimes. Green, instead, was putting in less, and spending more time shining on the mayor and trying to make some inroads into politics. The only time he seemed to be paying attention to his detachment anymore was someone put in an overtime claim or ordered new equipment. Then he would become intensely interested in everything they were doing. Never mind him, Rafe said. Let's have a look at the video. Sandy went back to speak to the clerk, who was still shaking, and to Quinn's mind might be in serious jeopardy of pissing his pants if he hadn't already. He also had a huge stringer of snot hanging from his nose. Sandy was approaching him with some reluctance. The other 3 Mounties shoveled through the doorway and into the store's stockroom. The video surveillance equipment was located in a cabinet beside a small cluttered desk. It was composed of a flat video monitor attached to a large black box covered in a myriad of buttons. Quinn looked at the thing in confusion, glad that Dave had some notion of how to operate it, because Quinn would be as likely to pilot a space shuttle as get anything out of the complicated-looking machine. Dave checked his watch. The guy came in about 25 minutes ago. He pushed a button in the flat monitor. And the flat monitor flared to life. The screen was divided into 4 sections by white lines, each section showing a different camera angle. One above the main entrance, one behind the till, one showing the sales floor, and one showing the back door. He pushed a few more buttons and the recording stopped and began to rewind. The digital image of the cops, firefighters, paramedics started in reverse across the screen. There was a blur of a man in a brown coat, and Dave stopped reversing the feed and hit play. The screen showed, by its different angles, the man entering the store with his knife already in his hand. The hood of his coat was up and his back was to the camera. There was no urgency in the man's walk. He sauntered into the building like he was out for a stroll and decided he had a hankering for a candy bar. The video playback did not have any sound, but it was obvious that the suspect gave no verbal cues or warning of any kind before the attack. He simply lunged at the woman as she stood looking at the racks of merchandise and rammed his knife into her stomach. She threw her arms into the air in surprise, the Mars bar she was holding flying into the aisle, and then started to swipe at her attacker as she staggered backwards. He stabbed her several more times before she fell into the rack, spilling the contents on the floor. When the girl's mouth opened in a scream, her boyfriend looked up from the magazine he had been perusing and rushed towards the man in the brown coat. The clerk behind the counter let out a scream of his own when the girl fell and could be seen scrambling for the phone. The boyfriend charged the attacker, his hands held before him like a crossing guard stopping traffic. As soon as he got close, the man in the brown coat slashed wildly with a knife and pursued the boyfriend as he backpedaled from the blade. The attacker continued slashing at as the boyfriend fell, opening great rents in his hands and chest. As quickly as the attack began, it stopped. The man in the brown coat did not try and take anything from them. He did not yell or scream or make any bold statements. He just stopped swinging the knife, looked at the 2 people lying on the bloody floor, and turned for the door. There was something in the way his behavior changed so quickly that made Quinn's skin crawl. There was no reason behind it, no logic, only madness. As the suspect left, he passed one of the cameras and looked up into it. "Can you make that part of the screen any bigger?" Quinn asked, tapping the entrance camera angle. Dave nodded, punched a few buttons on the recording device, and the entrance camera filled the entire screen. "Now back it up a little," Quinn said. "There. Now stop it." The screen showed a clear image of the suspect's face, surrounded by the hood of his coat. He was standing beside the ubiquitous height marker that appeared at every convenience store around the world. It declared him to be well over 6 feet tall. Quinn began jotting down height and facial features in a notebook when he heard Rafe gasp. He looked up at the big man. Dave was also looking at the corporal, whose face has lost a great deal of its color. "What's up, boss?" Quinn asked. "By all the fuck," Quinn said, tugging at his mustache. "It looks like him, but it can't be." "Can't be who?" Dave asked. "Brandon fucking Williams," Rafe said. "It looks like him, but the guy is too big. Brandon is a skinny little shit, barely 5'7" and maybe $120, while his pockets are filled with the shit he's stolen." "It can't be him," Dave said. "No way." Quinn looked at the screen in silence and said nothing. Rafe rubbed his eyes and looked at the screen again. "If I didn't know any better, I'd swear that was him. Guy looks just like him." He straightened from the screen and smoothed his mustache. Dave, you see to getting the video loaded into a disk. I've got some phone calls to make. Quinn, you'll start the canvas. Quinn nodded without looking as he jotted lines down his notebook. Yeah, I just got to get some things down while I'm thinking of them. Rafe nodded and walked towards the storefront. I've got a few blank CDs in my car, Dave said, walking out of the stockroom behind Rafe. When they were gone, Quinn checked to see that they hadn't stopped. He unzipped the carrier for his body armor and pulled out the picture of Brandon Williams that Rafe had given him at briefing. He smoothed the paper out and held it up against the image on the screen. He scrutinized it carefully, comparing the facial features and bone structure, making sure he wasn't mistaken. The man he had chased had been big, bigger than Quinn, fast, and in good shape. It certainly was not a scrawny drug addict. But, despite those assurances, Quinn was certain that the man on the video screen was Brandon Williams. That is the end of Chapter 4, my friends. As soon as I can manage it, I will record Chapter 5 and have it out to you. As always, thanks for being here.